When the school bell finally rang, chairs scraped back, and coats were grabbed in a rush of relief. You could already picture the walk home, the sound of doors closing, the freedom waiting outside. Then it happened. Your name, spoken calmly, almost casually. Everyone else flowed past the windows, laughing, disappearing down the road, while you stayed rooted to the spot. The classroom felt suddenly larger, quieter, heavier. You knew instantly this afternoon would stretch on, that home felt further away than usual. It was a small moment, but one that tightened the stomach and lingered long after school days. To understand why staying behind felt so ordinary, we have to step back into the Britain of the 1950s through to the 1980s. Schools then were built on routine, respect, and clear lines of authority. Time moved at a different pace. Lessons ended when they ended, not when the clock suited anyone else. And expectations were rarely explained because they were simply understood. After-school consequences sat quietly within daily life. Alongside packed lunches wrapped in grace-proof paper and shoes polished the night before. Parents expected it, teachers enforced it, and children accepted it with a shrug and a sigh. Staying late was not a drama or a discussion. It was part of learning how the world worked. Today, that same situation might prompt phone calls, meetings, and careful wording. Back then, it barely raised an eyebrow. You waited, you finished what was asked, and you went home a little later than planned. Those unwritten rules shaped generations, setting the tone for how authority, time, and responsibility were viewed long beyond the school gates. In those moments, childhood learned patience, silence, and endurance, lessons rarely named, quietly absorbed, and carried forward into working lives, family routines, and attitudes that lasted decades. The rituals that followed were familiar to many, yet rarely spoken about. Sitting alone at a desk, carefully rewriting work already understood, or finishing tasks while the classroom emptied of warmth and noise. Sometimes it meant tidying shelves, straightening books, or wiping boards long after the last lesson faded. The atmosphere mattered more than the task. Chalk dust hung faintly in the air. Chairs scraped across polished floors in distant rooms. A clock ticked loudly, each second stretching further than the last. Outside, daylight softened, then slipped away entirely, unnoticed, until it was gone. Corridors felt different once everyone had left. Footsteps echoed, sounding louder than they should, bouncing off walls that had been lively minutes before. Somewhere, a caretaker locked doors, keys jangling, reminding you the building was closing down around you. You waited quietly, hands folded, eyes drifting to the window, counting nothing in particular. Most people remember the classroom itself, the desks and blackboards and exercise books. Fewer remember how it felt once the school fell silent, when time slowed and every small sound seemed amplified. These after-school moments etched themselves deeply, not because of what was done, but because of how it felt to be left behind. And as those minutes dragged on, you learned that school did not always end when the bell said it did. A realization that gently leads us into what those moments were quietly teaching. Lessons absorbed slowly, unnoticed, shaping attitudes to patience, authority, and time, long after childhood ended completely. What those quiet afternoons really offered went far beyond simple discipline. Without speeches or explanations, they taught patience. You waited because waiting was required. You finished because finishing mattered. No one rushed to fill the silence or soften the moment. Boredom became something to sit with, not escape from. Staring at a window, tracing cracks in a desk, listening to the slow march of the clock. You learned to occupy your own thoughts. Today, such stillness feels unusual. Back then, it was expected. There was also an unspoken lesson about authority. Instructions were given plainly, and they were followed. Not because of fear, but because that was how order worked. These moments shaped how many later approached work, timekeeping, and responsibility, quietly reinforcing the idea that tasks were completed even when no one was watching. Perhaps most powerfully, these after-school moments taught endurance. That some parts of life would feel dull, unfair, or inconvenient, yet still had to be seen through. No applause followed, no praise waited at the end. You simply gathered your things and went home. Decades later, many still recognize that feeling in adult life, staying late to finish a job, waiting patiently without complaint, respecting structure even when it feels slow. These lessons were never written on the board, but they stayed, shaping habits and attitudes long after school uniforms were folded away. They settled quietly into memory, becoming part of how generations understood effort, fairness, and time itself over many ordinary days without anyone noticing. Walking home after staying behind carried a weight that few words could capture. The streets were quieter, the air cooler, and the rhythm of your footsteps louder than usual. Houses glowed softly behind curtains, and the smell of evening meals drifted through open windows, teasing you with warmth you were just missing. Sometimes you felt embarrassed, knowing others had already gone on ahead. Other times, there was a quiet pride in having endured, a sense of having completed something on your own. Tiredness settled into your shoulders, heavier than the school bag you carried. No one asked how it felt. You just hung your coat up, washed your hands, and carried on. That mixture of relief, reflection, and lingering tension was rarely spoken about, but remained vivid in memory, shaping how you approached small challenges long after childhood ended. The walk home was more than a journey. It was the closing note of a lesson felt as much in the body and heart as it had been in the classroom, setting the stage for the contrast with today's childhood experience. Today, things feel very different. After-school consequences are often replaced with conversations, support plans, and detailed feedback. The emphasis has shifted from quiet reflection to open dialogue, from routine to personalized understanding. That's not to say one way was better than the other, but simply that childhood itself has changed shape. Back then, being kept behind was accepted as part of life. No letters home, no big fuss, just time, silence, and the slow learning that not everything came easily. Those small, forgotten moments, sitting alone in a quiet classroom or walking home a little later than usual, may have disappeared from the modern school day. But for many, they still echo, not loudly, but softly. In the way we wait, in how we finish what we start, and in the lessons we remember most even when no one else noticed we were learning them.